I've got a heap more, but
Yep.
if
Over to
we
you,
have
Senator
more
Ludlam.
time to come back, I'll put them on notice. Thanks.
In that vein, how many of those seats are classified as marginal and how were they chosen? You could take this if you want, Senator Birmingham, or if the department's got some visibility. How did you settle on those particular sites?
The sites, I think, reflect commitments made by the government prior to its election.
Yep.
And I think you would find reflect a diversity of electorates, I suspect, from the list that I just heard.
It goes in no way at all towards answering my question. Senator Birmingham, maybe if you don't have the info at the table, could you provide us with a breakdown of those seats, and thank you for having those to hand, the margins that prevail in each of those?
Well, the officials given a breakdown of the seats. The Department of the Environment doesn't really run a register, I don't believe, of electoral margins. That's more the business of the AEC.
Just on that, sorry, Senator Ludlam, I just wondered if you're going to take something on notice, could you also just why those places were selected and what exactly that project will do would be useful as well? Thanks.
Sure. That's the more important question. I guess I can go out and chase whether there are political motivations underlying the selection, but if you've got other reasons or criteria that we use, Mr Kennedy, maybe you've got something?
Senator, I was simply going to add that, as Ms Hoytning said, those commitments were made actually outlined by the government in the election campaign.
Yep.
We provided the information around the areas that in which electorates fell simply because committees often ask us that information about how monies fall, but we're involved in no way in selecting them by electorate nor providing any information or any engagement around margins or anything of that order.
I certainly wasn't trying to insinuate that the department was. I've got strong suspicion that the government or the then opposition might have done, but you wouldn't have had visibility of that. But just to be clear then, between Senator Urquhart and myself, you have undertaken to take on notice Senator Birmingham rather than the department, the criteria on which those announcements were made prior to the election.
We'll endeavour to answer those questions on notice. Indeed, Senator.
Thank you. Why was there's the $2 million there. Why was the 1 million roofs commitment itself scrapped? It was an election commitment. The 1 million rooftops. There are plenty of comments on the record before the election that you'd be pursuing that. Why was it scrapped?
Senator, I think Dr de Brewer made some comments in that regard before. There are, of course, already around 1.2 million rooftop solar PV systems and around 856,000 solar hot water units supported in Australia.
Yep.
We've obviously outlined some further solar programs in this budget. We have, of course, also, as you're well aware, commenced a review of the RET, preparing an energy white paper, and of course dealing with the fiscal challenges in the budget. There have also, of course, been some very significant decreases in the costs of solar technologies in recent years that have made their uptake much more accessible to all parts of the community. So, with all of those factors in mind, the government deemed that proceeding with additional funding commitments at present was not a possibility.
Senator Birmingham, I think all of those arguments, some of them contestable, but they're all reasonable for you to put them. That being the case, that was all known last year. Why did the government take the policy to the election, given that range of reasons against doing so?
Well, Senator Ludlam, we've gone through a fairly exhaustive process in this budget of assessing the merits of a whole range of different things, many of which in other parts of the portfolio we've been exploring during the course of the day. And ultimately, in the budget, we've reached a landing point on this that we still want to make some investment in innovative solar programs, and that's why the the Solar Towns program that we were just exploring proceeds with its $2.1 million commitment.
All right, I'll come back to this if there's time. I suspect Senator Urquhart might have a couple more as well, but let's come to the direct action policy, and it may be that Senator Urquhart traversed some of these questions as well, so humour me. As a percentage, I take it the government still, I think one of you has mentioned it already, the government still believes that it can reach a 5% emissions reduction target, and that is still official government policy, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, well played. As a percentage, how much of that 5% target will direct action deliver?
Dr. De Boer, if you were about to.
Okay. It's premature to be specific around that at this stage, Senator. But I do note that the government in the white paper is absolutely firm in its commitment to meet the 5%. There are a number of features of the emissions reduction fund that are still under design, or decisions need to be made, and that they'll be important to being able to determine what the overall impact on meeting that target is. That they include, in terms of the crediting and purchasing process, what the contracting length will be. So that's a material, that's what the white paper sets out, an expression of interest process to determine that.
I'll come to that in a sec. If we don't have an answer, I'm sorry, time's short.
No, okay, but one other aspect is around the safeguards and the design of the safeguards. So without those key features, Senator, it's very hard to say what the abatement will be specifically from the features, but noting that the government is absolutely firm in its commitment to meet the 5% reduction on 2000 levels.
Yeah, I think Minister Hunt has used the word confident quite a bit. If you don't have those numbers, you don't know. You can't tell me what proportion of the 5%. On what basis does the Minister go out every day proclaiming how confident he is?
Well,
that we haven't even designed the policy yet. It's the middle of 2014.
Well, Senator, a lot of design work has been done.
Not enough to tell us how much abatement it will deliver.
That we've been through, and as Dr. De Boer has indicated, and has been canvassed by other officials, there are other elements that are well identified in the white paper to be firmed up over a period of time, and obviously, in making policy decisions around those final aspects of the operation of the Emissions Reduction Fund, the government will have to the front of mind its commitment to achieve the 5% reduction target and ensure that that policy commitments align with that.
So, look, my next question you might have preempted. I was going to ask whether you've comprehensively mapped how you reach that 5% reduction target, and you kind of haven't. There's some ideas in the mix.
Senator, I think, and this is, others may want to say something here, but this is perhaps one of those interesting issues where, of course, every year the government releases updates of what the projections of emissions profiles look like, and they change to a certain extent every year, dependent upon economic circumstances and otherwise. So this view that, whether it's questions of modelling or mapping or otherwise, this view that there's a completely concrete pathway with no variables attached to it.
I'd be happy to have a rough guess. You're not even able to provide us with that. Orders of magnitude, how much of the 5%?
Senator, what we're putting in place is the framework to get us there, and we're confident that framework will achieve that outcome.
You understand why others might not share your confidence. Here's someone who doesn't share your confidence. The Climate Change Authority, their assessment was that without a carbon price, but with your direct action policy, although admittedly you do keep moving the goalposts, but with a direct action policy as the authority understood it, well, maybe moving is a bit generous. There aren't any goalposts yet. The authority suggested there'd be a 17% rise in emissions above 2000 levels by 2020. That's on page 8 of the cap and target review. They're not suggesting you're going to make a 5% reduction. They're suggesting we're heading for a 17% increase. So does the department agree with that? And if you don't, on what basis do you disagree?
Senator, I can refer to the projections which underpin some of the Climate Change Authority's assessment, which were broadly consistent with the projections that the government published late last year. As we indicated earlier, we will update the projections either late this year or perhaps, well, it's a matter for government when they're released, but won't be in a position to provide updated projections. And it has certainly been the case that with each update of projections over the last few years, and I suspect it will be the case given some recent announcements in the industrial sector, that the cumulative emissions reduction target consistent with -5% has been fallen and has fallen considerably over the past few years. As the Senator said earlier, that means that if a policy is targeted directly at that -5%, it sensibly flexes with the cumulative reduction that's required to be achieved. The second thing I would note is that in the Emissions Reduction Fund white paper, the government outlines the information that will be published after each auction and each year around the amount of abatement that's been contracted, the amount of contracts that have been signed, and the weighted average price that Mr Power referred to earlier. In other words, as soon as auctions are running, there will quickly be a stream of information about how successful the Emissions Reduction Fund is in achieving abatement, and that will of course inform both the government and more broadly the public debate about the success of the fund in achieving the -5%.
That's good. The reporting is good. What if it turns out, as many people suspect, that it's going to be hopelessly inadequate, and yet there's a capped pool of funding there, and I'll get to how much that is in a moment? You're not going to be able to go back to Treasury and ask for more money. So what are you going to do if there's a hopeless shortfall?
The government was explicit in the white paper that further funding for this program would be considered in future budgets.
I thought we have been told that actually, in fact, that's a comment from the Prime Minister, that there won't be any additional funding.
I read a quote from the white paper earlier that reflects the statement of Dr Kennedy.
That you will be able to come back for more money from consolidated revenue.
Senator Ludlam, we're confident that the task can be done, but the government will be considering future appropriations beyond the $2.55 billion in future budgets. Okay, as long as you're aware that you're sharing the room with people who have nothing like your sense of confidence, that's all. But that's good, and that is at odds with some of the things that I've been hearing, so you can go back and ask for more money. Just briefly, back on solar rooftops, is it the case that the conventional fossil generators lobbied the government to, or the opposition, I guess, the then opposition, to abandon the Million Rooftops program? Was there advances made by effectively competitors to private solar generators to drop that initiative? No, not that I'm aware of.
Do you want to take that on notice, Senator Birmingham?
Well, it depends on...
It might not have been lobbying.
I mean, do you want to know, was the minister lobbied? Because I can take that on notice.
Yeah. Not you personally, but yeah, the minister.
Sure.
Or the
then shadow minister.
The shadow minister, or since the election, I guess. It was a policy you took to the election, it's been dropped. I'd like to know who was part of that decision-making process.
I can take that on notice as it relates to Mr Hunt. Obviously, I don't want to go and poll every member of the government, but I'll take that on notice as it relates to Mr Hunt.
Okay. So just coming back then to where I was, I'm not clear on how you rebutted the Climate Change Authority's assessment that there's going to be a 17% rise in emissions. Have they just got that dead wrong?
That was the businesses, that's the, without direct action, business as usual.
No, with direct action, without a carbon price.
From memory, Senator, Climate Change Authority appears tomorrow, so happily take the issues up with them. But
well, I'm interested to know whether on what points you disagree.
From memory, the 17% increase was a business as usual projection without a carbon price or the carbon tax in place.
Which is what this government's policy
or any
is.
other policy, but did include, for example, the existing RET policy from memory in that projection.
Right.
And then, which is often called, as the Secretary said, the business as usual projection, and then one looks at the wedge between that and the -5% that you were talking to. What I was talking about earlier is that 17% increase has been coming down as an estimate over time, certainly through our projections. We're involved in providing advice to the Climate Change Authority under the previous government in preparing those projections, and what I was foreshadowing is I wouldn't at all be surprised if those projections came down again when we update them later in the year, but because there has been some closure of plants that are, or one could have called emissions intensive of nature, smelters for example, so I suspect that number would come down again.
Would you expect it would come down from +17 to -5? Pretty big wedge.
Well, we'll wait till we publish the projections, but I wouldn't expect it to come down to -5.
No.
But that is why the government has in range a policy with the direct action plan at the centre to achieve the reduction, Senator.
All right, could you work us through...
So just clarifying that, Dr Kennedy, you're saying that it won't come down to -5 without any action, but with the government's direct action plan, that is the case?
What I'm saying,
that.
Chair, is that I expect the extent of the challenge, the difference between the two lines, will narrow because the business as usual projections are falling for other reasons.
Shutting down industries, etc.?
Well, the high dollar has obviously been very difficult for some industries, and we've seen some parts of the industrial sector close or announce closure. And then secondly, as a Senator I think has been alluding to, the government has policies in place to then meet the rest of that gap to get to the -5.
No, I wasn't alluding to them. I was trying to discover what they were, those policies.
Hanso doesn't quite get sarcasm, but duly noted.
Yeah, they do. Look, they do. So can you just step us through the finances? And I know this again was an area that Senator Urquhart traversed. The budget estimates or the budget papers say that $1.4 billion will be available over the forward estimates for direct action. The Minister just a few weeks before, this is on the 24th of April when he launched the ERF white paper, said that the final estimates here of 2017-18 there would be $1 billion allocated, which would take the total to just over $2.5 billion over the forward estimates. Now, as I say, I know Senator Urquhart took some of this on before, but just tell us about the difference in funding. Why is it suddenly so much less, or is it not? Is there some other trickery afoot here?
It's, I think we went through this in considerable detail before, Senator. The 2.55 billion is can be fully spent over the forward estimates, and fully spent means that the government writes contracts worth 2.5 billion. That the budget treatment though means that it doesn't appear in the budget until the government said that it won't pay for the abatement until the abatement occurs. So it's payment on delivery of abatement, and so that is. And when you've got contracting, it means that it's expensed then over a longer period.
Wow.
So for example, Senator, if we in year one write a contract worth $100 million for, hypothetically, it would be unlikely to work this way, but hypothetically for abatement that was delivered in equal portion for each of 5 years, we would actually pay out $20 million per annum over those 5 years as the abatement came in under that $100 million contract. But the government will have contractually committed itself to $100 million in year one. What the budget is allowing for, consistent with what was announced when the white paper was released, is that $2.55 billion can be contracted over the first 4 years, but payment is on delivery of abatement.
Is that a completely unique way of treating the forward estimates, that a department could contract out an amount that's significantly larger than what's in the budget papers? I've never seen that done before.
No.
We had that conversation too, Senator. The government has authority in the measure to spend $2.55 billion.
It makes it clear in budget paper 2 on page 103, Senator, where it says the Clean Energy Regulator will be able to commit under contract the full level of funding, which is the $2.55 billion, from the commencement of the